iLearner. Learn today, lead tomorrow.
Ever get that feeling? Like organizations, businesses, whatever, they're just one unexpected thing away from, I don't know, chaos.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think, especially these days, it feels like we're all walking a tightrope a little bit.
Right. So today, what we're diving into is, well, it's all about how to navigate all that uncertainty, about giving organizations a roadmap, a plan to deal with the risks, the stuff that could go wrong.
Makes sense. I mean, none of us can predict the future, but we can definitely try to be a little more prepared.
Exactly. So we're going deep into risk management, and the guidebook we're using for this deep dive is ISO 31000.2018. It's the globally recognized standard for all things risk management.
Yeah, ISO 31000 is kind of like the Bible of risk management.
Exactly. So we're gonna break it down and make it clear, make it practical.
Yep.
Whether you're a seasoned risk manager or you're just starting to think about this stuff.
Yeah, because I think sometimes these standards can feel a little intimidating, A lot of jargon, a lot of technical language.
Right, totally. And that's what we're here for. We want to cut through all that and get to the core of what this standard actually offers.
Great. Looking forward to it.
So we'll explore the fundamental ideas, the structure that ISO 31000 proposes, and the actual step-by-step process.
Yeah.
How do you actually do this stuff?
You're right. Like, how do you take it from theory to practice?
Exactly. Now, this isn't this isn't the first version of this standard. The 2018 edition actually built upon the 2009 version. So what's the big shift in this more recent, this updated thinking?
I think one of the biggest things that shifted is the kind of the focus on leadership. The 2018 version really emphasizes that managing risk isn't just some, side project, some box you tick. It has to be like baked into the DNA of the organization.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it needs to be coming from the top, influencing everything from like big strategic decisions to the way people do their everyday tasks.
Right. That makes sense. So it's not just about like having a risk manager in a corner office somewhere?
Exactly. It's got to be part of the culture, the way everyone thinks and operates. And the 2018 version also, it really underscores that risk isn't static. It's not like you do this assessment once and you're done.
Right.
It's dynamic. It's constantly changing. So you have to be, always adapting, always learning, always refining your approach.
Okay, so let's get into the actual core ideas here, the principles that ISO 31000 lays out.
Okay.
There are 8 of them.
Yeah.
And the first one is this idea that risk management should be integrated.
Yeah.
What's a real world picture of that in action? What does that actually look like?
Let's say you've got a construction company, right? And they're bidding on a new project. So in the past, maybe they would just look at the blueprints, the cost estimates, and try to come up with a bid.
Yeah.
But an integrated approach means that from the very beginning, they're thinking about, okay, what are the potential risks here? What could go wrong? What could disrupt this project? So they're thinking about things like supply chain disruptions, materials not arriving on time, weather delays, safety hazards, all of that.
Right.
And they're factoring those considerations into their planning, their pricing, everything from the very beginning.
Interesting. So it's not an afterthought.
Right. It's not like, oh, we won the bid, now let's think about the risk. It's like risk is part of the initial conversation.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I like that. The second principle is that risk management, it needs to be structured and comprehensive. So why is a piecemeal approach, just doing things here and there, why is that not going to cut it?
Okay, so imagine you're trying to solve a puzzle.
Huh?
But you've only got half the pieces, and you don't even have the picture on the box to guide you.
Yeah, that sounds frustrating.
Right. That's kind of what it's like when you have a piecemeal approach to risk management. You're just dealing with things in isolation. You don't have a clear picture of the overall risk landscape.
Yeah.
So a structured approach means that you have a consistent way of identifying, analyzing, and evaluating risks across all parts of your organization. It's like having a framework, a system in place.
Okay, so what's an example of a framework, a tool that organizations might use?
A common one is a risk register.
A risk register.
Yeah. It's basically a document or sometimes a software system where all potential risks are documented and assessed in the same way.
Oh, okay. So it's like a centralized place where you're tracking all the risks.
Exactly. And that allows for meaningful comparisons. You can see, okay, this risk is high, this one's medium, this one's low. You get a holistic view.
Okay, so it's about consistency and having that big picture.
Exactly.
All right. The third principle is customization. It's not a one-size-fits-all suit, is it?
No, definitely not. I mean, think about it. A small, startup, a tech startup that's moving really fast, they're going to face very different risks than, say, a large, manufacturing company that's been around for 100 years.
Right, yeah.
So the beauty of ISO 31000 is that it provides the principles, the framework, but it's up to each organization to tailor it to their specific context.
Okay, so it's kind of like it gives you the ingredients, but you have to create your own recipe.
Exactly. And I think a lot of times the biggest risk is thinking that your risk management needs are like standard, you know?
Interesting. So the danger is in thinking there's a prepackaged solution.
Yeah, because every organization is unique.
Got it. Principle number 4 is inclusivity. Who needs to be at the table when we're talking about risk?
It's not just the executives in the boardroom, right? It's anyone who can impact or be impacted by the organization's activities.
So that could be like employees. Employees at all levels, definitely. Customers, suppliers, even the community. If the organization's activities could have an impact on the local environment or the people who live nearby.
Right. So it's really about getting a wide range of perspectives.
Exactly. Because different stakeholders bring different insights. I mean, think about it. If you're a hospital and you're implementing a new, patient management system or something,
right.
The executives might have a certain view of their risks, but if you talk to the nurses and doctors who are actually on the front lines, they might see totally different risks that the executives didn't even think about.
Interesting. So it's about getting those ground level perspectives.
Exactly.
Okay. The fifth principle, that risk management should be dynamic. It's not a set it and forget it kind of thing, right?
No, not at all. I mean, especially in today's world, right? Everything is changing so fast. Technologies emerge, regulations change, global events can have ripple effects everywhere.
Yeah, definitely.
So organizations have to be, they have to be constantly scanning the horizon, monitoring their risk environment, and being ready to adapt their strategies.
So it's almost like it's a constant recalibration.
Exactly. And I think sometimes there's this temptation to think, okay, our risk management is good enough, we've got it figured out.
Right.
And that's usually the moment when new threats start to emerge.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Principle 6 is about using the best available information. And I mean, that sounds obvious, but what are some of the pitfalls there?
Well, it's not just about having lots of data. It's about having the right data, information that's relevant, that's reliable, that's up to date. And even then you have to recognize that information has its limitations. Past performance isn't always a predictor of the future.
Right.
And there's always going to be some degree of uncertainty. So it's about making the most informed decisions you can, but also acknowledging what you don't know.
Okay, yeah. The seventh principle focuses on human and cultural factors. So how do our behaviors, the way we work together, how does that impact risk?
This is huge. I mean, think about it. If you have a workplace culture where people are afraid to speak up, where they're afraid to report mistakes or near misses, then risks are going to stay hidden, right? They're going to fester and then they're going to explode into big problems later on.
Oh, yeah.
But if you have a culture of open communication where people feel safe to raise concerns, to report potential problems without fear of blame,
right,
then you're going to be much better at identifying and addressing risks early on.
Yeah. So it's almost like it's a preventative measure.
Exactly. And I've seen this firsthand, in organizations where there's a culture of fear. It's like you can't even have an honest conversation about what might go wrong.
Right. Okay. And finally, the eighth principle is continual improvement. It's about learning and getting better.
Yeah, absolutely. Risk management is not a one-time project. It's an ongoing cycle. So you need to be constantly reviewing your framework, your processes, learning from both your successes and your failures, and looking for ways to improve.
So it's like plan, do, check, act. kind of.
Exactly. You plan your approach, you implement it, you check to see how it's working, and then you make adjustments based on what you've learned.
Because it's like a feedback loop.
Exactly. And that feedback loop is essential for continual improvement.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork. We've talked about the principles, the kind of foundation of risk management. Now, how do you actually build a system to put these principles into practice? And that brings us to the risk management framework. What are the essential pieces, the building blocks of this framework?
Okay, so the framework it's like the architecture, the structure that supports risk management within an organization. And it all starts with leadership and commitment from the top.
Okay.
I mean, without that visible buy-in from the leaders, from the executives, risk management efforts they're not going to go anywhere.
Right, so it's about setting the tone from the top.
Exactly. And it's not just about like saying the right things. It's about backing it up with actions, with resources, with clear responsibilities.
Yeah, walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. So think about it. If you're a CEO and every time you give a strategic update, you're talking about risk management, you're emphasizing its importance, that sends a powerful message to the entire organization.
Right, so it becomes part of the fabric of the organization.
Exactly.
Okay, and then from leadership, we move to integration. How does the framework ensure that risk management isn't just like a separate activity, something that's done off in a silo somewhere?
So integration means that you're weaving risk considerations into all of the organization's core functions.
Okay.
So that's its governance structures, its strategic planning, its operational processes, even its performance management.
Oh, wow. So it's really touching every aspect of the organization.
Yeah, it's not a bolt-on, it's an integral part of the design. So for example, when a company is setting its strategic goals, it should be explicitly considering the risks that could prevent it from achieving those goals.
Interesting. So it's risk-informed decision-making.
Exactly.
Okay, the next component is design. What are the key steps involved in actually setting up this framework?
So designing the framework starts with understanding the organization's unique context. And that context includes both internal factors and external factors.
Okay, so give me some examples.
Sure. So internal factors, that's things like, the organization's culture, its resources, its capabilities, like does it have the right people with the right skills to manage risk effectively?
Right.
External factors, that's things like the market, the regulatory landscape, the competitive pressures. So, for example, a sudden change in government regulations could be a huge external factor.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then internally, maybe the company is using outdated technology. That could be a significant risk factor.
Okay, so you got to understand your internal landscape and the external landscape as well.
Exactly. And once you have a good grasp of the context, the next step is to articulate the organization's commitment to risk management.
So that's where, like, a policy document comes in.
Exactly. You need a clear policy that outlines the organization's objectives for risk management, how it's going to be integrated, who's responsible for what.
Right, so it's putting it in writing, making it official.
Yeah. And then you need to assign roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities at all levels of the organization. It can't just be the risk manager's job. Everyone has to play a role.
Correct.
And then crucially, you need to allocate the necessary resources. So that's people, processes, tools, everything that's needed to actually implement the framework effectively.
Right, because if you don't have the resources, it's just a piece of paper.
Exactly. And then the last piece of design is establishing effective communication and consultation processes.
Right, so it goes back to the inclusivity principle.
Yeah, you need to make sure that all stakeholders have a voice, that they're informed, that they have opportunities to provide input.
Okay, so once you've got the blueprint, the design in place, the next step is actually putting it into action, right? Implementation.
Right.
How does that unfold?
Implementation is about making the framework a reality. So it involves developing specific plans, breaking it down into actionable steps. It's about embedding risk management processes into decision-making at all levels of the organization.
So it's not just like a top-down thing.
No, it has to be integrated into how everyone does their work.
Got it.
And it's also about making sure that everyone understands their role, their responsibilities related to risk. So it's about training, it's about communication, it's about making sure that everyone's on the same page.
Okay, so it's really about translating those policies and procedures into day-to-day practice. And then after you've implemented the framework, how do you know if it's actually working? That's where evaluation comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. Evaluation is about periodically assessing the effectiveness of the risk management framework.
Okay.
So you're asking questions like, is it achieving its intended purpose? Is it aligned with the organization's objectives? Are we actually managing risks more effectively?
Right. So it's kind of like a checkup.
Exactly. And it might involve looking at key risk indicators, conducting audits, gathering feedback from stakeholders, all those kinds of things.
And the goal is to identify, like, what's working well and what needs to be tweaked.
Exactly.
Okay. And then the final piece of the framework puzzle is improvement. It's a continuous cycle, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Improvement is about ongoing monitoring, learning, and adaptation. So the organization needs to be constantly looking for ways to enhance its risk management framework,
Yeah.
in response to changes, both internal and external changes, and also based on the lessons learned from past experiences.
Right. So it's always evolving.
Exactly. It's about striving for a more robust and effective approach over time.
Okay, so we've covered the principles, the framework, kind of the big picture of risk management.
Yeah.
Now, let's get down to the nuts and bolts, the actual risk management process itself. Where does this practical step-by-step process, where does it begin?
Okay, so the risk management process, the actual doing of it, kicks off with communication and consultation. And it's important to emphasize that this isn't a one-time event.
Right.
It's an ongoing dialogue with all the relevant stakeholders throughout the entire process.
Got it.
So it's about sharing information, seeking input, making sure that everyone understands the risks, how they're being assessed, how they're being managed.
Okay, so it's like constant communication.
Yeah. So, for example, imagine you've got a software development team, right?
Okay.
And they're building a new application for a client. Well, as part of the risk management process, they should be regularly discussing potential security vulnerabilities with their client.
Interesting. Okay, so it's about keeping everyone in the loop.
Exactly.
All right. With those lines of communication open, what's the next step?
The next step is to define the scope, context, and criteria.
Okay.
So scope, that's about being really clear about what you're actually assessing. Is it a specific project, a department, the whole organization?
Right, right.
And then context, we talked about this a bit in the framework design.
Mm-hmm.
It's about understanding the internal and external factors that might influence the risks.
Yeah.
And then criteria, this is super important. This is about establishing the risk criteria. So that's basically, what level of risk is acceptable to the organization? How are you going to determine if a risk is significant or not?
Oh, okay. So it's like setting the boundaries, the limits.
Exactly. And sometimes people refer to this as the organization's risk appetite.
Oh, interesting.
Like, how much risk are you comfortable living with?
Right.
So, for example, if you're launching a new product, your risk criteria might be based on potential financial losses and the impact on your brand reputation.
Okay, so you're defining what matters most.
Exactly.
All right. Once you've defined what you're looking at, the scope, the context, the criteria, then you can move into risk assessment. How's that broken down?
Okay, so risk assessment it's really the heart of the process.
Mm.
And it involves 3 key stages: risk identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation.
Okay. Take me through those.
All right, so risk identification, that's about actively searching for, recognizing, and documenting potential risks.
Okay, so it's like a brainstorming session.
Yeah, it could involve brainstorming. It could involve reviewing past incidents, analyzing industry trends, all sorts of things.
You're trying to uncover all the potential risks, all the things that could go wrong.
Exactly.
Got it. And then risk analysis.
So risk analysis is where you delve deeper into each identified risk. You're trying to understand its likelihood of occurring and the potential severity of its consequences. So this might involve assigning qualitative ratings, high, medium, low, or it might involve using quantitative data to estimate probabilities and impacts.
Okay, so you're trying to quantify the risk, get a sense of how big it is.
Yeah.
And then risk evaluation.
So risk evaluation is where you take the results of your analysis and you compare them against your established risk criteria. And that helps you decide which risks need to be prioritized for treatment.
Okay, so it's about deciding which risks are the most important to address.
Exactly.
All right, so after you've evaluated the risks, you need to decide what you're going to do about them. That leads us to risk treatment. What are some of the options there?
Okay, so risk treatment involves selecting and implementing strategies to modify risks. And ISO 31000 outlines several options, so you can avoid the risk altogether.
Okay.
And that might mean, deciding not to proceed with the activity that creates the risk.
Right, so just don't do it.
Exactly. Or you can accept the risk. And that might mean just monitoring it keeping an eye on it, but
Mm.
not taking any specific actions to reduce it.
Right. If it's a small enough risk, maybe that's the best approach.
Exactly. Or you can remove the risk source. So if the risk is coming from a particular piece of equipment, maybe you replace it with a newer, safer model.
Okay.
Or you can change the likelihood of the risk occurring.
How do you do that?
So that might involve implementing preventative controls. So for example, if you're worried about a fire, you might install sprinkler systems.
Right. So you're making it less likely that the fire will happen in the first place.
Exactly. Or you can change the consequences if the risk does occur. So that might involve things like contingency planning.
So you're saying, okay, if this bad thing happens, here's what we're going to do to minimize the damage.
Exactly. Or you can share the risk.
Right.
And a classic example of that is purchasing insurance.
Right. So you're transferring some of the risk to the insurance company.
Exactly. And then the final option is to retain the risk. And that basically means accepting the potential consequences.
So if it's a small enough risk, maybe it's not worth the cost or effort to try to avoid it or mitigate it.
Exactly.
So it's really about choosing the right strategy for each specific risk.
Yeah, there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Got it. Okay, so you've treated the risks, you've implemented your strategies. Is that the end of the story?
No, not at all. Monitoring and review is an ongoing activity throughout the entire risk management process. So you need to be continuously checking the effectiveness of your risk treatments.
So you're making sure that the things you're doing are actually working.
Exactly. And you also need to be tracking emerging risks.
Right, because new risks can pop up all the time.
Exactly. And you need to make sure that your risk management framework is staying relevant, that it's adapting to changes.
So it's about constant vigilance.
Yeah. So, for example, let's say you've conducted a cybersecurity risk assessment and you've implemented a bunch of security controls to mitigate the risk. Well, you need to regularly check the effectiveness of those controls, make sure they're still working, make sure they're still appropriate.
Right, because the threat landscape is constantly changing.
Exactly.
And then the final step in the process is recording and reporting. Why is it so important to document all of this?
So recording and reporting is crucial for transparency, accountability, and learning.
Okay.
It basically provides a documented history of the whole risk management process. So that's, the risks that were identified, the analysis that was conducted, the treatment decisions that were made, and the outcomes.
Right, so it's like a paper trail.
Exactly. And that information is really valuable for communicating with stakeholders, informing future risk assessments, and also demonstrating the effectiveness of your risk management efforts.
Okay.
So common ways to do this are maintaining a risk register and generating regular risk management reports.
Okay, so it's about capturing all that information in a systematic way.
Exactly.
So it's a full cycle, isn't it? It's not just a linear process. It's constantly feeding back into itself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more than just a checklist. It's a dynamic way of thinking and operating.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And it's important for you, the listener, to remember that this discussion is our interpretation of the ISO 31000.20 Wentine guidelines.
Right. We're not the definitive authority on this.
Exactly. So for the complete details, for the full picture, we really encourage you to refer to the official standard document itself.
Yeah, it's a good read.
Really.
Yeah.
And we'd love to hear about your experiences with risk management.
Yeah, any insights you've gained, any questions that have come up for you during this deep dive?
Please share your thoughts in the comments on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, we always love hearing from our viewers.
Definitely. So this whole exploration of ISO 31000.20118, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
About how we approach uncertainty, both in our professional lives and our personal lives.
Yeah, because risk is everywhere, right? It's not just in the workplace.
Right, totally. So I guess the takeaway is, how consistently and comprehensively are we applying this kind of structured thinking to the uncertainty in our lives?
That's the question, isn't it?
And what might be the unexpected benefits of adopting a more deliberate and integrated way of thinking about and managing risk? It's definitely something to ponder.
A lot to chew on.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then.